Ukraine did not lose the intelligence war to Russia, it lost it to Washington, to a decision made in the Oval Office at 11:23 p.m. that cut every CIA feed, every satellite data stream, every signals intelligence product flowing to Ukrainian commanders. Trump signed it. By 3 a.m., 43 Ukrainian frontline commanders had lost real-time battlefield intelligence simultaneously. No warning. No transition period, no alternative source. 1 minute, the feeds were active. The next minute, nothing. By sunrise, 3 frontline positions in the Zaporizhia sector had collapsed. Russian forces advanced 23 kilometers in 6 hours, the fastest single-day territorial gain of the entire conflict. 400 Ukrainian soldiers are unaccounted for in the collapsed sectors, not casualties confirmed, unaccounted for. Because without intelligence feeds, Ukrainian command does not know where its own units are. And in Kyiv, Zelensky received the confirmation of what happened at 4:47 a.m., not from Washington. Washington did not call. He received it from his own commanders, telling him the American intelligence architecture that Ukraine's entire defensive strategy was built around had been switched off like a light. In this analysis, I will answer 4 questions. What exactly was cut, and what does the loss of American intelligence actually mean for a military that built every defensive plan around it? How did Russian forces exploit the intelligence blackout so quickly, and what does that exploitation speed tell us about Russian preparation for exactly this moment? What happened inside the White House in the hours before the order was signed, and what does the decision process reveal about who made it and why? And where does Ukraine's defensive capability go from here, when the intelligence architecture is gone and the front line has already started moving? Subscribe now. Share this with anyone trying to understand what this decision actually means. I read every comment. Let us get into the breakdown. The American intelligence support to Ukraine was not a single feed. It was an integrated architecture of 7 distinct intelligence streams that together gave Ukrainian commanders a battlefield picture no other source could provide. Let me be specific about each one. Because the official description, intelligence sharing, obscures what was actually flowing and what its absence means operationally. Stream 1. NRO satellite imagery. The National Reconnaissance Office operates a constellation of imaging satellites whose resolution and revisit rate over the Ukrainian theater provided Ukrainian commanders with updated imagery of Russian force positions, logistics movements, and equipment concentrations every 90 minutes on average. That 90-minute update cycle was the foundation of Ukrainian artillery targeting. Every significant Ukrainian artillery strike against Russian logistics, command positions, and armor concentrations in the past 18 months used NRO imagery as its primary targeting input. Without it, Ukrainian artillery targeting reverts to ground-based observation, slower, less precise, limited to line-of-sight range. Stream 2. NSA Signals Intelligence. The National Security Agency's collection against Russian military communications provided Ukrainian commanders with real-time intercepts of Russian unit-level communications. The radio traffic, the encrypted messaging, the command transmissions that told Ukrainian intelligence where Russian units were, what they were planning, and when they were moving. This stream was the earliest warning system for Russian offensive preparations. Every major Russian attack that Ukraine successfully defended against in the past year was preceded by NSA-collected indicators that gave Ukrainian defenders 12 to 48 hours of preparation time. Without it, the first warning of a Russian attack is the attack itself. Stream 3. CIA Human Intelligence Reporting. The CIA's network of human sources inside Russian military and political structures provided strategic-level intelligence, not tactical unit positions, but operational intentions, command decisions, and the political context behind military movements. This stream told Ukrainian leadership what Russian commanders were planning weeks before the plans became operational. Its loss does not create an immediate tactical hole. It creates a strategic blindness that compounds over weeks and months as Ukrainian planners make decisions without understanding Russian intentions. Stream 4. NGA Geospatial Analysis. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency provided continuous analysis of terrain, infrastructure, and environmental conditions across the Ukrainian theatre. The analytical product that tells commanders which routes are passable for armoured vehicles, where defensive positions can be established, what the ground conditions mean for operational planning. This is not glamorous intelligence. It is the foundation of every movement order, every defensive positioning decision, every logistics route selection. Ukrainian staff officers have been using NGA products for every operational plan for 2 years. Without them, planning reverts to paper maps and ground reconnaissance, slower and less comprehensive. Stream 5. NRO radar satellite data. Separate from optical imagery, radar satellites provide all-weather, day and night coverage of ground movement, the capability that tracks Russian armor columns moving at night or under cloud cover. Ukraine's Eastern Front experiences an average of 14 days per month of overcast conditions that defeat optical satellite coverage. On those days, radar satellite data was the only source of real-time Russian movement intelligence. Those 14 days per month are now effectively blind. Stream 6. Cyber Intelligence Sharing. NSA and Cyber Command were sharing real-time intelligence about Russian cyber operations targeting Ukrainian military networks. The advance warning that allowed Ukrainian cyber defenders to respond to Russian intrusion attempts before they succeeded. Without that sharing, Ukrainian military networks are defending against Russian cyber operations without the early warning that has kept those networks functional for 2 years. Stream 7. Commercial Satellite Tasking Coordination. The United States was coordinating commercial satellite tasking, directing Maxar, Planet, and other commercial providers to prioritize Ukrainian theatre coverage and sharing the resulting imagery through secure channels. This coordination amplified the coverage that NRO satellites provided and filled gaps in government satellite coverage. That coordination ended with the order signed at 11:23 p.m. All 7 streams cut simultaneously. No transition, no handover to alternative sources. No warning to Ukrainian commanders to prepare contingency collection plans. The Ukrainian military built its entire defensive architecture around the assumption that this intelligence architecture was permanent. That assumption was reasonable. It had been in place for 2 years, it had survived multiple political transitions, and no American official had ever indicated it was conditional on anything other than continued conflict. The assumption was wrong. It was conditional on a decision that one person in Washington had the authority to make unilaterally. That person made it at 11:23 p.m., and the front line started moving before sunrise. Russian forces did not stumble into the opportunity created by the intelligence cutoff. They were waiting for it. The speed of Russian exploitation, 23 kilometers of advance in 6 hours across 3 frontline sectors, does not reflect improvisation. It reflects preparation. Specifically, preparation for the scenario where Ukrainian battlefield intelligence is suddenly and completely degraded. Let me explain what that preparation looks like operationally. Because the 23-kilometer advance did not happen because Russian forces happened to be in the right place. It happened because Russian forces had been pre-positioned for exactly this exploitation window. In the 6 weeks preceding the intelligence cutoff, Russian forces conducted what analysts initially assessed as routine rotational movements, replacing exhausted frontline units with fresh ones, repositioning artillery, moving logistics forward. Standard operational maintenance activity that occurs continuously along a contested front line. It was not routine. It was pre-positioning. The units that advanced 23 kilometers this morning were not the units that had been in contact with Ukrainian forces for the previous months. They were fresh units. rested, fully equipped with full ammunition loads that had been moved into forward positions over the preceding 6 weeks under cover of the routine rotation assessment. Their positioning was optimized not for the current frontline contact, but for rapid advance through the specific sectors where Ukrainian defensive positions were most dependent on American intelligence for early warning. Russian signals intelligence collection against Ukrainian military communications had identified which Ukrainian units were most dependent on American intelligence feeds for their defensive planning. Those unit sectors were the sectors targeted in the exploitation advance, not the sectors with the weakest Ukrainian forces, the sectors with the forces most disoriented by the sudden loss of intelligence they had come to depend on as their primary situational awareness source. The timing of the advance, beginning at 3:14 a.m. within 2 hours of the intelligence cutoff, confirms that Russian forces had prepared execution orders contingent on the cutoff occurring. They did not need to assess the situation and develop a response. They executed a plan that was already written, waiting for the trigger condition to be met. That trigger condition was the intelligence cutoff. Russia knew it was coming before it happened. How? 2 possibilities, both of which the intelligence community is currently assessing. First, Russian penetration of the American decision-making process. The order to cut intelligence sharing to Ukraine was not made in isolation. It was discussed, debated, and prepared across multiple meetings and communications channels in the days before it was signed. If Russian intelligence had access to any element of that discussion, through human sources, signals collection, or cyber penetration of communications systems, they would have had advance warning sufficient to prepare the exploitation plan. Second, Russian signals intelligence detection of the cutoff itself. The moment American intelligence feeds to Ukraine were cut, the absence of those feeds was detectable through Russian signals intelligence collection against Ukrainian military communications. Ukrainian commanders receiving no intelligence updates would have communicated that fact, requesting status updates, reporting the loss of feeds, coordinating contingency responses. Those communications, intercepted by Russian signals intelligence, would have confirmed the cutoff within minutes of it occurring. 2 hours was sufficient time to execute a pre-planned exploitation that was already prepared and waiting. Either way, whether Russia knew in advance or detected it in real time, the exploitation was pre-planned. The 23-kilometer advance was not opportunism. It was execution. I want to be precise about what I know and what I am assessing, because this section of the analysis carries the most political weight and requires the most careful framing. What is confirmed? The order cutting American intelligence sharing with Ukraine was signed at 11:23 p.m. It was implemented immediately and completely. No transition period was provided. Ukrainian counterparts were not notified in advance. What the decision process that produced that order looked like, based on my knowledge of how these decisions are made and the specific political context of the past 6 months, is the following. The decision did not originate with career intelligence officers. No senior CIA, NSA, or DIA official recommended cutting intelligence sharing with Ukraine. The operational case for maintaining that sharing, its contribution to Ukrainian defensive effectiveness, its deterrent value against Russian escalation, its intelligence return to American collection through Ukrainian battlefield reporting, is unambiguous within the professional intelligence community. Career officers do not recommend cutting intelligence that is working. The decision originated at the political level. Specifically, in the context of ceasefire negotiations that the administration has been pursuing through back channels with Moscow for the past 3 months. Those negotiations have involved discussion of confidence-building measures, steps each side could take to demonstrate seriousness of intent. Cutting American intelligence sharing with Ukraine was presented in that negotiating context as a confidence-building measure. A demonstration to Moscow that Washington was serious about creating conditions for negotiated settlement. The operational consequence of that measure, The frontline collapse that began before sunrise was either not assessed by the people who made the decision or was assessed and accepted as a tolerable cost of the negotiating objective. Neither possibility reflects well on the decision-making process. If the operational consequence was not assessed, if the people who signed the order did not understand that cutting 7 simultaneous intelligence streams to a military conducting active defensive operations would produce immediate frontline degradation, then the decision was made in ignorance of its operational meaning. That ignorance, in a decision of this consequence, is itself a failure. If the operational consequence was assessed and accepted, if the people who signed the order understood that Ukrainian frontline positions would collapse and accepted that as the price of a negotiating gesture toward Moscow, then 400 unaccounted-for soldiers and 23 kilometers of lost territory were a deliberate policy choice. Made without consulting the Ukrainian government. Made without warning Ukrainian commanders. Made and implemented while Ukrainian soldiers were in active defensive positions that depended on the intelligence being cut. The $175 billion that American taxpayers spent on Ukrainian defense since February 2022 was spent on the assumption that American support was operationally real, that it would be maintained through the operational situations that required it, that the commitment meant something beyond the budget line. The order signed at 11:23 p.m. is the operational definition of what that commitment actually meant. Ukrainian defensive capability without American intelligence is not zero. It is fundamentally different from what it was 24 hours ago: slower, less precise, more reactive, and more dependent on sources that carry higher risk and lower coverage than what was just removed. Let me assess each alternative source category and what it can and cannot provide. European intelligence sharing. Britain's GCHQ and MI6 maintain independent collection capabilities against Russian military targets. France's DGSE and Germany's BND have collection programs in the Ukrainian theatre. These programs are real. They are not substitutes for the American architecture that was cut. European satellite coverage of the Ukrainian theatre operates at lower revisit rates than NRO coverage, updates every 4 to 6 hours rather than every 90 minutes. European signals intelligence collection against Russian military communications is less comprehensive than NSA collection. Narrower target coverage, lower intercept volumes, less analytical depth. European partners will increase their sharing in response to the American cutoff. The increase will not close the gap. Ukrainian organic collection. Ukraine has developed significant indigenous collection capability over 2 years of conflict. Its own drone reconnaissance, its own signals intelligence units, its own human intelligence network inside Russian-controlled territory. These capabilities are real and have contributed substantially to Ukrainian battlefield effectiveness. They operate at tactical and operational range, the front line, and immediate rear areas. They do not provide the strategic depth that American satellite and signals intelligence provided. They cannot see 200 kilometers into Russian territory to track the logistics movements and force concentrations that tell Ukrainian planners what is coming before it arrives. Commercial satellite imagery. Maxar, Planet, and other commercial providers will continue to image the Ukrainian theatre. Their coverage is less frequent than government satellite coverage. Their resolution is lower for moving target detection, and their analytical support, the government analysts who turned raw imagery into actionable intelligence products, is no longer available through the American sharing architecture. Commercial imagery is better than nothing. It is not a substitute. The cumulative effect of substituting these alternative sources for the American architecture is a Ukrainian intelligence picture that is approximately 40% as comprehensive, 60% as timely, and significantly less analytically processed than what existed at 11:22 p.m. last night. Ukrainian defensive planning that was built around 90-minute satellite update cycles now operates on 4 to 6 hour cycles. Positions that were adjusted continuously based on real-time intelligence about Russian movements are now adjusted based on information that is hours old by the time it reaches the commanders who need it. Artillery targeting that was precise because it was based on current imagery is now less precise because the imagery is older. The front line that was stable at 11:22 p.m. is moving this morning. It will continue moving until Ukrainian commanders adapt their defensive doctrine to the intelligence environment that now exists, an adaptation that takes weeks under combat conditions, not hours. In Moscow, the operational return on whatever was offered in back-channel negotiations to produce the intelligence cutoff is being calculated with satisfaction. Russian forces gained 23 kilometers of Ukrainian territory this morning. More importantly, they demonstrated that the American commitment to Ukrainian defense has a political price that can be negotiated. That demonstration is worth more strategically than 23 kilometers of contested frontline terrain. In Warsaw, in Tallinn, in Vilnius, the capitals of NATO members whose security planning rests on the assumption that American intelligence sharing is operationally reliable, the order signed at 11:23 p.m. is being read with the focused attention of governments updating their assessments of what American commitment actually means when tested. The answer this morning's events provide is not the answer those governments have been building their security architectures around. In 30 years of military analysis, I have watched intelligence failures produce operational disasters. The pattern is consistent. Modern military forces are not simply defeated by superior enemy firepower. They are defeated when the information architecture that makes their firepower effective is removed, and they have no time to adapt before the consequences arrive. Ukraine's information architecture was not removed by Russia. It was removed by Washington. By a decision made at 11:23 p.m. without warning, without transition, without consultation with the military that depended on it. 43 commanders went blind simultaneously. 3 frontline sectors collapsed before sunrise. 23 kilometers lost in 6 hours. 400 soldiers unaccounted for. Those are not the consequences of battlefield defeat. They are the consequences of a policy decision, made by people who either did not understand its operational meaning or accepted its operational meaning as a tolerable cost. The Ukrainian military will adapt. It has demonstrated across 2 years of conflict a capacity for operational adaptation that has consistently exceeded analytical expectations. The adaptation to a degraded intelligence environment will happen. It will take weeks. The front line will continue moving during those weeks. The question I leave you with is not about Ukraine's adaptation capacity. Ukraine has demonstrated that capacity. The question is about the decision that made adaptation necessary. When an ally that received $175 billion in support and built its entire defensive strategy around an intelligence architecture has that architecture removed overnight without warning, what does every other American ally conclude about the conditions under which American support is operationally real? And what does Moscow conclude about the price of American commitment, now that it knows that price can be negotiated? Leave your assessment in the comments. I read every response. If this breakdown delivered the depth you came for, share it, hit like, subscribe. The next update is already being prepared. Stay with me.